Good morning, students. So, today we are going to start the third chapter of history in the earliest cities. In this chapter, we are going to understand about the earliest cities, the cities which were in the very ancient time. You would have heard the names of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro cities many times. So actually, in this chapter, we are going to understand about such kind of old cities or very ancient cities in this chapter. So first of all, before going to understand anything, here we are going to see the story of Jaspal and Harpreet. So, saving old buildings. Jaspal and Harpreet were playing cricket in the lane outside their home when they noticed the people who were admiring the dilapidated old building that the children called the haunted house. Look at the architect. Look at the architecture, and said one of the men. Have you seen the fine wood carving? Asked one of the women. We must write to the minister so that she makes arrangements to repair and preserve this beautiful house. Why they wondered, would anybody be interested in the old run down house? So here it was the time of cricket playing, and Jaspal and Harpreet were playing the cricket in the lane outside their home, and they noticed some of the people were admiring one of the dilapidated means what, which is old and very completely kind of uh, broken house it was, dilapidated old house it was. So people were admiring that house. Most often the children were calling this house as the haunted house. Why they were calling that house as a haunted house? Because it was so big and very old and completely dilapidated. So, how the people were admiring that building? Look at the architecture, one of the men said. Means they were praising the architecture of that building. And some of the people were saying that, see how fine wood carving is there, decorated on this building. And in this way, the woman said that, how, men and women said that how this building is very beautifully built. And finally they said, the people said, we must write to the minister so that the so that the government will make such kind of arrangement that the government will repair and preserve this beautiful old house. Now the question arises that why do the people are wondering about such kind of old building, or why they were so much of interested in the old building? So these questions came in the mind of both Jaspal and Harpreet. Let's try to understand why these old buildings are important, why should the government should preserve them, or why the government is trying to preserve many of the old buildings, many of the old architectural work. So let us begin from the story of Harappa. The story of Harappa. Very often, old buildings have a story to tell. Nearly 150 years ago, when railway lines were being laid down for the first time in the Punjab, engineers stumbled upon the site of Harappa in present day Pakistan. To them, it seemed like a mound that was a rich source of ready made, high quality bricks. So they carried off thousands of bricks from the walls of the old buildings of the city to build railway lines. Many buildings were completely destroyed. So, uh, it is the story of Harappa. Almost 150 years ago, when the railway lines were laid down in the region of the Pakistan, where the city was located, ancient Harappa city was located, engineers stumbled upon the site of Harappa. Now, this Harappa, site of Harappa, is in the Pakistan nowadays. To them, It seemed like it was a mound of a rich source of ready-made high-quality bricks. They thought it would be a mound of ready-made rich quality bricks. So what they did then? They carried out all the bricks from the walls and they used it in the construction of the railway lines, and in this way many buildings were completely destroyed. Then, about 80 years ago, archaeologists found the site and they realized that this was one of the oldest cities in the subcontinent. And this was the first city to be discovered. All other sites from where similar buildings and other things were found were described as Harappan. These cities developed about 4,700 years ago. So here, almost 80 years after when the railway lines were constructed, almost 150 years from now, just 80 years ago from this time, some of the archaeologists found the site and they realized that this was not a mound of the old bricks or rich, good quality bricks, but it was the oldest cities in the subcontinent. Means in the Indian subcontinent, this city was one of the oldest cities of that time, and this was the first city to be discovered. All other sites from where similar buildings and other things were found were described as Harappan. So all these old buildings and old archaeological sites of this region of Pakistan, now which we call as the Harappa, the cities developed almost about 4,700 years ago from now. So we can say that these cities, which are found almost 80 years ago, were developed around 4,700 years ago. So now we are going to see the next point, and that is what was special about these cities. Let's try to understand that these old cities or ancient cities, which are found almost 80 years ago by the architectures, what was special about these cities, how these cities were constructed, what was the architectural style of all these old cities. Let's try to understand in this next point what was special about these cities. So many of these cities were divided into two or more parts. Usually, the part to the west was smaller but higher. Archaeologists describe this as citadel. Generally, the part of the east was larger but lower. This is called the lower town. Very often, walls of baked brick were built around each part. The bricks were so well baked that they have lasted for thousands of years. The bricks were laid in an interlocking pattern and that made the walls strong. So here it is said many of the cities were divided in two or more parts. So whatever the old Harappan cities were there, these were divided in two or more than two parts. Usually the part to the west direction of the city, usually the part of the city which was situated or located in the west part of the city was smaller. This part of the city was smaller. The part which is located at the west, this part of the city was smaller but it was higher. Archaeologists describe this as the citadel. So this part of the city which was located in the west was described as the citadel by the archaeologist. Generally, the part which was to the east or to the eastern part of the city was larger, but it was lower. It was not higher like the citadel. It was lower, and this is called the lower town. The archaeologists call this town as the lower town. So, in this way, the part of the city which was located toward the west was called as the citadel, as it was higher, and the part of the city which was towards the east of the city was a lower town, because it was large but lower. Very often walls of baked brick were built around each part. So in each part of the city, the walls of baked brick were built around each part. So we can say it was these walls of brick were like the we can say a fortification around the city. You would have knowing about the forts. Forts are built for what? Forts are built for the protection of the city or any particular part of the important part of the country. So in this way, the the, the baked brick were used to build such kind of walls around the cities. The bricks were so well baked that they have lasted for thousands of years. That means now it is almost more than 4,700 years. But till now, these all old baked, uh, all these bricks are yet strong. The bricks were laid in the way that it was interlocked. Means when the walls were constructed, at the time of construction of the walls, the bricks were laid in such a way that it was completely interlocking pattern, and that made the walls very very strong, and it was not breakable by any outsider enemy. So in some cities, special buildings were constructed on the citadel. For example, in Mohenjo-daro, a very special tank which archaeologists call the Great Bath was built in this area. This was lined with bricks coated with plaster and made watertight with a layer of natural tar. There were steps leading down to it from two sides. While there were rooms on all sides, water was probably brought in from a well and drained out after use. Perhaps important people took a dip in this tank on special occasions. So, as you can see here, as you can see here in this part of the chapter, here in this map, Mohenjo-daro, if you can see, Mohenjo-daro was located toward the west. And what was special about this Mohenjo-daro citadel? The Mohenjo-daro in the Mohenjo-daro, a very special tank was constructed. The tank like this, as you can see here. Such kind of tank was constructed in the Mohenjo-daro, and this tank was made from the very good quality bricks. And the tanks was after construction of the tank, it was coated with the plaster, and it was made watertight with a layer of natural tar. Watertight means what? Watertight means so that the water should not flow or absorbed by these bricks, and for that these tanks were watertight with the help of natural tar. And there were steps leading down to it from two sides. There were steps to get down into the tank from two sides, while there were rooms on all sides. On all sides of this tank, there were some rooms, and water was probably brought in from a well and drained out after use. So the water was brought here from a well, and when the water was used, the water was drained out of the tank. Perhaps only few people, some important people, could take a dip in this tank, and that too on the special occasions. So we are going to understand many more things about all these we can say cities. But before that, let us complete this last paragraph for today. Other cities such as Kalibangan and Lothal had fire altars where sacrifices may have been performed, and some cities like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Lothal had elaborate storehouses. So there were some other cities like Kalibangan, Lothal, where fire altars were found. What are the fire altars? You would have seen when some kind of puja or ritual is there in your home, the pandits are putting some things inside that to do the sacrifices like ghee and all that. This kind of fire altars were found in the Kalibangan and Lothal cities, and this probably would be made for the sacrifices. And some cities were there like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Lothal had elaborate storehouses where the things were stored. So about all these cities we are going to understand in the next period. In the next period we will start to discuss about houses, drains, and streets. So let us think about it in the next period. Till then, thank you very much.